What's shaking? So this is another 10+ year item for me. That would be my pocket knife, my EDC Benchmade foldable knife. Now I've had this thing on my person for, like I said, 10 years, easy, if not probably closer to 12 at this point. And it's been a great knife. It's been beat up, it's tough. I use it in work all the time, and being in manufacturing industry, I work with a lot of steels, aluminums, hardened steels, and things of that sort. And I use it to scrape stuff. I use it to take off maybe super glue that's being used. I use it to, you know, the standard cut open boxes and tape and things like that. But this is the one I always go back to for work. I'll end up taking you closer so you can look at some of the wear. I mean, that belt clip used to be black. Missing a screw there, it never seemed to bother it much. Sharpened it myself. I've never sent it in for sharpening. I'm sure Benchmade would do a good job with that, but I never really wanted to be without my knife for that long. But yeah, I've tried a couple of other pocket knives in the past, and I always go back to this one for work just because it's tough. So a couple things I wanted to talk about in this video is, because this was my first real pocket knife, and before that I only ever really carried like Swiss Army knives or maybe Leatherman or something like that. I got my Leatherman 10-year review on the channel as well if you want to watch that. Leatherman Wave. This was my first real pocket knife that I carried on my person almost indefinitely, and I wouldn't change it for the world. This thing is great. So I wanted to talk about, you know, why I started wearing one, why I think more people should, because it surprises me how many guys, anybody, gals, go without having any type of cutting tool on them. And I use it all the time, and when it's as tough as the Benchmade is, I can actually use it for other things. I've unscrewed Phillips head screws before with it. I've used it as a pry bar because it's such a tough steel. I've used it obviously to just cut open packages. You know, if you're the only one with a knife, you're the one opening everything up on Christmas and whatnot. And I've just had so many uses for it. I'm surprised more people don't carry. So I want to talk a little bit about that. So for wearing this knife 10 years, I mean, you'll see it when we get closer to it. It's held up very well. Benchmades are tough knives. They're expensive knives. I won't argue that. You know, this Griptilian isn't even one of the more expensive models. But it ran me about $130 when I bought it, if I'm not mistaken. And, you know, at the time, I was only maybe 20, 21 at the time, and that was, you know, a fair amount of money to be spending on a knife, especially my first knife. But the guy that helped me pick it out, he was a salesman at Gander Mountain, if you've ever been there before. And he had real world experience with it. Told me about how he used the knife to actually cut a seatbelt open in an accident, and it was actually a big deal for him, and he looks at the knife as something that saved his life. I haven't had any of that scenarios, thankfully, but that was part of what he said he loved about the one-hand access lock opening and closing, because you can use this with gloves, you can use it in a bad scenario like that and have easy access to your knife. You know, it's a robust system, and we'll look more at the access lock. I'll probably I'll probably compare it to a couple other knives that I have just so you can see the differences. And I will say it's my preferred method as well for unlocking a knife. I think it's great. So anyway, we'll take you down to the table and I will show this compared to a couple other knives, and we'll go from there. Okay, so here it is. This is my Benchmade Griptilian that I've worn for over 10 years. Realistically, the scales are still in pretty good shape. I mean, yeah, a couple dings. Definitely gets more wear up here. That's probably because what I wear in my pocket with it, realistically, because that's right where something would be touching. Like I mentioned, this used to be totally black. It's now been worn very smooth and silver. I haven't cleaned it in a little bit. The access lock still moves great. I am missing that button head cap screw there. I think it's just a hold down the center of the scale. It's never seemed to be an issue. It didn't cause any type of weird play or anything like that, so I haven't been too worried about replacing it. It's a little annoying that it's gone, but what can you do? That's the steel type, the 154 cm there. This is the only blade I've ever had with that steel. Like I mentioned before, it's very tough steel. Holds the edge for quite a long time. I don't sharpen this blade very often. But you can see just from the scuffs and scratches on it, she's been used quite a bit. But that's why I said I always go back to this knife for work, for my job, because one, it's a thick knife, and I'll show you in comparison to some other ones. It's very thick, it's very robust, you know, and I'm not really worried about breaking it or damaging it. It holds up. I've never had any failure points, any issues with it. It's been a great EDC knife for me. Now, if we compare this, say, to, let's see, I have a Rat Ontario. I believe this is Model 2, yep. There it is. OS8 steel, Model 2. Let's see if we can get that in focus. Yeah, there we go. Ontario Knife Company. Now I do like this knife. I carry this on me sometimes when I want something lighter, thinner in profile. I mean, if you look at them side by side, I mean, you can just tell the Griptilian is just a beefier knife. Bigger in pretty much every dimension. Which, you know, like I said, for something like work or something heavy duty, something you plan on really beating a knife up, I mean, this is great. I would never choose to beat this knife up. I would never choose to pry something with it. It's way too thin, way too dainty. The steel is not nearly as tough as the 154 cm, so I've noticed this one chips way easier, even with the lighter duty stuff I've done with it. I really like this knife. I'd recommend it to anybody. It's not a very expensive knife. I think you can find these for like 30 bucks. And I really do enjoy it. But it's not nearly as tough. If you want a tough knife, the Benchmade's the way to go. Now this one has a liner lock here to move out of the way. I don't mind a liner lock, but in comparison to the axis lock, this thing is just great. It's like having a fidget toy. Especially when I first bought this. I mean, the amount of times you just kind of flip it open and close. Yeah, it ends up being a lot like a fidget toy. This is a really enjoyable knife to carry and have on you. Another one, this is a new one for me, relatively new, maybe within the last 6 months. This is a Civivi Elementium, I believe they call them. I'll put a link in the description for it. This, again, is a nice knife, but it's way thinner, way more dainty in comparison to the Griptilian. Just in the thickness of the blade, the thickness of the scales. The comfort on this one too is very high. It's very nice and easy to grab. The scales are grippy enough. I've never really been worried about this slipping out of my hand. Whereas knife like this, it's got grip, but it's square in its body. It's flat, so you don't get as much purchase on it as you do the Griptilian, I find. Griptilian's more molded to your hand a little bit. It's more rounded on its edges, bowled out in the center. This is another knife. I would recommend it as well. You can see I was actually beating up on it a little bit. I was trying to scrape something that was hard to get something off of it, and left some witness marks there for me. But I mean, I'm somebody generally, if I'm going to buy something, I'm going to have something on me and I need it for something, I'm going to use it as a tool. I don't try to abuse my tools, but I do try to use them. You know, I'm not going to not use it in fear of hurting it and walk away and go get a different tool or something. This is also a liner lock, and it sits on ceramic bearings. So this one, this is a fun knife. I like that. I could do a separate review for that if anybody's interested. Same for the Rat, but we're going to stay focused on the Benchmade. You know, would I recommend this knife specifically to anybody? Absolutely. If you didn't want the larger version, you can get a Griptilian Mini, which I'm sure is just as good, just smaller. I didn't mind having the full size for me. Do I have any... I don't have any experience with the other Benchmade knives just because they are pricey. I didn't see a reason to buy another Benchmade when I have a good Benchmade already. Maybe if this one broke on me and I couldn't get it replaced through warranty, then maybe I would just try another style of Benchmade. But as long as it's got the access lock and a good steel, I don't see how you could go wrong. I've had great luck with these. So as far as like anything I don't like about it, there's not much, really. I can't ask for more out of a pocket knife, really. It's comfortable. It's held up. Its locking mechanism has never failed me. I mean, even the pocket clip. I've had this thing catch on stuff, fly out of my pocket. I've never bent it. They made it out of good spring steel. I mean, this thing is just held up. I have no issues with it as far as functionality goes. Like I mentioned earlier in the video, it is a harder knife to sharpen, at least for me. It's such a tough steel that you really got to work at it for a while to get it sharp. And then because it's so thick, you end up getting a good working edge, not so much a hair-popping sharp edge. I can definitely get a shave style edge off of my rat or my Elementium. Harder to get that on this. I have before. I've spent the time to do it before, but it's not really necessary. I mean, it's still, I know this test doesn't really matter at the end of the day, but it's, you know, it's sharp. It will cut this stuff easy, you know, but I don't use it to cut paper. I mean, that's not a real functionality test. That's just to show it is still sharp. It is a sharp knife. That would be the only gripe, but they use such a good steel that it's hard to sharpen. That doesn't sound like an actual con to me. Yeah, I would recommend this to anybody. You can also switch the carry position with that. So I think we'll close out this video. I think I covered everything I wanted to cover on this. We'll talk about some maybe future content and go from there. Okay, so that was a look at my 10+ year worn Griptilian knife by Benchmade. Yeah, as I said, I would recommend it to anybody. It's a great knife, and I think anybody would be happy wearing it. Got my notes here. I wanted to talk about future video and content. See if anybody wanted to chime in, talk about, you know, maybe some style of videos, things that they'd like to see. If it's in my wheelhouse, I'll see what I can do. I have a couple ideas moving forward. I got a couple more EDC items that I would potentially like to review, like maybe my flashlight or a couple of my normal pocket items. I could even do a full EDC pocket dump type of scenario. I have a pack, EDC pack that I generally carry on me as well. Could dive into that. I also get into 3D printing, making around the house solutions, tool solutions. I have a pretty good idea for one of those videos. I think might be next. So yeah, let me hear what you guys think. If there's anything anything that stands out, leave it in the comments. I'll be looking at all of them. Let me know what you think and go from there. Until next time.